everyone. I'm Lanika Mussolini, and welcome to our next webinar for the 2021 Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion series. Today's webinar is on research administration and data, what the data says about us, and how we can leverage this information to be the change that we seek. We have some special panelists with us on today that will share a wealth of information with you all. You all have their bios that was emailed to you earlier this week or when you registered, but let me briefly introduce them. First, we have Dr. Saika Ann Qureshi with the University of California, San Francisco. We have Dr. Mario Medina with the University of Kansas Medical Center. And we have Dr. Jennifer Shambrook with the University of Central Florida. An overview of today's agenda. First, we will give you background information on survey work, followed by the results of several survey studies, and then we will round it off with what they mean for research administration. And now I will turn the session over to Saika.
Thank you so much, Lanika. Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for speaking with us or being here while we speak today. So I'm going to start with why a survey at all? So why would you do a survey? What's the plan? How does this happen? So if you want to do this, what you're hopefully seeking is, does your leadership match your community? What does your community look like? Who is in your community? Are we serving that population? And to do that, you need to know who your population is. So why is it important to plan this? You have to know that you have questions or a business problem that can be solved by a survey and that you need this data. And you need to think about if it should be paper or online and optimized for mobile. And there's kind of a three-part process in terms of where you come from. And that is, what will we learn from the survey? And will the survey generate the data to answer those questions? How long will it take from start to finish? And how much time do we need to invest? And then how much do we need to invest in the survey and how much will that cost? When we develop a project plan, we really need to think about the survey value and then the survey cost. We need to define the scope of the project to think about how long the survey will take, how we're going to invite respondents, how we collect our data, and how we get our results. We need to define our audience so that we know who we are actually including. And my colleagues are going to talk a little bit about a couple different surveys and the different populations that were included. We need to define our project team and resources, and then our timeline. Next slide. I'm now going to hand over to Jennifer.
Good afternoon. Many of you may have participated in the longitudinal study on research administration known as RASPERS, the Research Administration Stress Perception Surveys. Those began in 2007 and have been repeated in 2010, 2015, and 2020. And each time we had one of those surveys, there was something unique going on in research administration. In 2007, it was during the doubling of the NIH budget. 2010, it was ARA. 2015, it was the implementation of the Bear Claw of CFR 200. And in 2020, of course, we had the COVID pandemic. Our profession is one that's high stress to begin with, so there was a great interest in stress. And the way this survey actually got started was because of one of our colleagues actually succumbing to a stroke due to stress in her 40s at an Ankara conference back in the 2000s. So this has been an ongoing survey that over 3,000 people have responded to. One of the things about this survey, I've used the Research Admin Listserv and Ankara data, and they validated one another. So, you know, if you come up with a certain demographic profile in one survey and then you see another survey and it's drastically different, then those surveys would not validate one another. But what we're seeing survey after survey after survey is that our population, for example, is 80 to 85% female. And that is repeated whether you look at Rasper's or you look at Incura surveys or you look at the survey that's been done by iNorms called RAP 1 or 2. There were 3 different IRBs that approved the surveys as they were going through. And I think that one of the advantages of having both the Incura survey and the Research Admin Listserv surveys is that people who perhaps are not in an institution where they have the professional development support to allow them to belong to a premier research admin organization could still participate in the survey. So a lot of our folks that are just getting into the profession, or perhaps they work at an institution with fewer resources, could still participate in the survey. So next slide.
Hi, this is my slide. Good afternoon, everybody. I wanted to talk a little bit about the response rates that we've received over the years. We've done a couple of Incura surveys throughout, and recognizing that one of the things that spoke out to me amongst the regions was that it appears that women have a higher response rate proportional to men. I've noticed that over and over every year, which is a good thing, considering that we are 85% women in the community and in the research community and in Incura. One thing to keep in mind too, also the response rate, like I mentioned, it is higher. We've had increased response rates early on, from 26 all the way to 50% response rates over the years. I think that's really good that people are interested in finding out more about the demographics and about our community research. And they do align, as Jennifer mentioned, with a lot of her research and Rasper's as well, pretty much along the lines of the same type of experience that she's having, and the numbers appear to be really reflective throughout our regions, amongst our regions. We'll have some other information, other benchmark information to look at, like Bureau of Labor Statistics will be compared to with what our demographics looks like. So I think it's going to be really good to get that insight as to how we understand what is our composition throughout our regions and in our field. So I think there's a good inference there to take from. Next slide, please.
Thank you so much, Mario. So thank you, Jennifer and Mario, for really talking about the communities that we've surveyed and the surveys that have occurred in our field over the last couple of decades. So I want to talk a little bit about the latest survey that was done in the beginning of 2021, and just in general about how you talk about question selection. So people may ask, you know, how do you just pick these questions? I filled in some surveys. How does this work? So what we really need to ask ourselves in our early plan is, what do we want to learn from the survey? How much time will it take? And how much do we need to invest? So when you talk about question selection, the key thing is to use, it's all based on great intentionality. At the highest level, you have to match the questions about demographics of members in an attempt to determine if the community that takes the survey is actually matching what's in Incura or what's in the community as a whole. And then we had some really specific questions. So Incura's demographics are quite broad, and we wanted to do some sub demographics, particularly breaking up Asian from one group into the composite parts, as well as some of the Latinx questions. We also wanted to make sure that we had better coverage of things like gender. So right now for Incura, it's just male, female, or decline to answer. We wanted to have further gender options as well as sexual identity. Further beyond that, we also wanted to have religion for the first time. The two main sources for that were both from Pew, and we listed them in alphabetical order to match the US Census work that's done. In addition, we had the disability or different abled status used from Purdue University. That was also done for the first time. And for veteran status, we wanted to expand on the Incura intake form, just so we had a better sense of if people are still active duty or in reserve as well. We polled questions about, for that survey, we were interested in the climate. And so we were able to use banks of questions around belonging, training, leadership, pipeline, discrimination, harassment, and allyship. So that was really the space that we were working within. Next slide. In terms of the detail, or the nitty-gritty, as I call it, the audience is the research administration community, primarily within Incura, but the community as a whole. And the schedule of the survey for this latest survey is that it went out in early 2021 and was open for 2 weeks. I want to kind of emphasize the demographic panel. For those of you who took it, you may remember the demographic panel was at the beginning of the survey. There was some discussion about this, but there's been some work done by the VA in 2010, which really reconfirmed that is the best place to put that, with the highest completion rate when that is where it is located. We were also very intentional with language. We used a Likert scale, and we were intentional with our verbs. A Likert scale is 1 for unfavorable and 5 for favorable. And then we used a range, and that was really what mattered to us in terms of being able to then compare it. We used age questions. We used ranges and drop downs to make it as easy as possible to fill in, to really give us a better sense of the age and demographics. And we also optimized for mobile. So we use SurveyMonkey as a tool. That's what Incura uses, and that's your system of choice. And we thought approximately 15% would fill it out on a cell phone. So we did optimize for mobile there with an array, so it could be arrayed horizontally or vertically, and would array correctly on an iPad or computer screen, which was really incredibly important as well. Next slide. Some of you may be asking yourself, well, how do you verify that those questions are actually answering what you're interested in? So we used a how, now, and wow. And so you have an example here of what this is. So what we do is you verify that the survey covered the desired breadth of research questions using this type of metric, this type of matrix. So this was used with the Diversity and Inclusion Committee, and we did a shared whiteboard on Zoom in July of 2020 as part of the survey design phase. So the now is comparative work with previous surveys. The wow space is innovation that's relatively simple, and the how space is complex innovation that we're not sure if we can do it, but we want to try that anyway. So an example there is things like crossing over with the salary survey. Next slide. I'm just going to show you what was actually filled in and what we found. So under now, what we wanted that were things like other surveys was to identify more opportunities, identify training, what we need from diversity and inclusion and how it's measured, as well as comparison to BLS and Rasper's data. The wow was innovation but simple. So that was about comparison to other industries, to have regions report back and have the regional work there, having funded sessions, understanding the metrics to support action. And then the how section was the more complex innovation, was thinking about marketing and recruitment, infusion of all training with diversity, equity, and inclusion, integrating those findings into results, contextualizing data, that data identified, and creating specific targets. Next slide. In terms of a data plan, so you may be thinking, okay, so you do a survey and you get some data, and then like, what do you do with it? How does this all happen? How do you get the graphics, which you will see soon, some beautiful graphics. So a data analysis plan is a roadmap of how you're going to organize and analyze your survey data. It helps you achieve your 3 objectives, which is to answer your top research questions, use more specific questions to understand those answers, and segment your survey responses to compare opinions about different different demographic groups. Early analysis. So you want to clean your data, you want to run your initial reports, you need to analyze and then do a final report. So the way that this kind of works is you want to use like things like tracking keyword frequency, word clouds. From other work that we've done, you may know we really want to focus on visually led data. So after you want to run your preliminary reports, so you make sure you've got your original questions answered, you have at least one statistical vignette, that you're matching, things match, you run a basic panel to make sure that those who filled in the survey match your overall population. You look for initial trends, you analyze, usually using ratios, and then your stages are to write your summary, then you do a mini report, you reveal your interesting or unexpected trends, and you do a conclusion. So that's kind of the process that's undertaken, and what you see. But the real key here is to think about how you're going to communicate to your audience. So you want to understand your audience, you need to be brief, you need to have reports and findings clear, and then you need to be honest and go into the details. So it's very exciting, as we'll have some details from many different surveys in our next section. So next slide is we're going to jump right on into the data section.
Psycho, before we get started with the data section, let me ask, if someone is interested in developing a survey for their campus or their division, but they have little to no experience in doing so, how can they get started?
All right, I can start, and then my colleagues are all both excellent resources for this. So luckily, there's a lot of materials available online to help you. So the basic structure of a survey is some basic demographics at the beginning, always at the beginning, that are going to let you know what age range, gender, racial identity, and if you're doing it on a campus, potentially which campus community identity, staff, student, faculty, and also type of staff in some cases, like central department, etc. That would be your basic, and then you get into kind of your content questions. So as we kind of discussed, it's all about, there's a huge amount of materials available. We have a wonderful resource slide as well, but it's really about thinking about what your questions are and then how you ask them to engender the responses. But I want to defer to my two colleagues who are here on the call with me.
Yeah, I would agree as well with, it's really also finding out what are the questions that are relevant to what you're looking for. It's looking at those opportunities that that really are clear and concise questions, that there's no confusion in those questions, that they're pretty straightforward questions. I think the more complicated the question is, the harder it is for somebody to want to even fill it out. They may get another aspect of surveying is survey fatigue. If you do multiple surveys all the time, you might sort of turn off people. And the other part is that also consider the fact that a lot of the folks that you're surveying may have perceptions of certain questions and may not want to fill it out. Long surveys are really difficult. I try to keep it under 20 at that rule of thumb. Those are just basic baseline survey kinds of outlines. I don't know. Do you have anything else there, Jennifer, that you want to share with us?
One of the things that you always want to remember to do is be very, very considerate of people's time. And I think that if you have the opportunity to put a progress bar on the bottom of the survey, people know, okay, I've answered half the questions, I've only got a little bit more to go. That way the person may stay in there through the whole survey. And then finally, I would also think about confounders. What are things that could confound the survey? For example, one of the things I was worried about with stress is, will it only be stressed out people that answer the questions? But as it turned out, when we saw the results, there were, believe it or not, people that answered that they felt that they worked under minimal stress. And it showed that there were people from all different perspectives that were in the survey.
Thank you all for responding. And as you all see, the audience has already responded to our first poll, which is what % of your workforce in your team or office do you think is 40 years old or younger? And 41 to 60% think that their team is either 40 years old or younger. So let's talk about age. Mario.
Yeah, this leads into this poll nicely because it really does point to retirement and point to having that concerns institutionally of having to leave their organization and leaving with great institutional knowledge and technical knowledge, quite honestly, that these folks are looking at. There's a lot of recent statistics that are coming out on how many people are actually retiring in the workforce this year due to the pandemic, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in later slides. But I think that's something to consider. What are other fields doing to mitigate some of that parting ways, I guess. Succession planning and strategy and implementing the professional development ladder, possibly building some robust training programs, adopting some flexible work schedules. These are kinds of things that, if I point to the chart here, look at the national statistics on 2020 population working from, this is from BLS. You look at the workforce is 50% of are boomer and Gen X, and about half of these Gen Zs and millennials. So Incura is about 35% underrepresented in the younger working groups. As you can tell, we are not really reflective of the national population as far as demographics are concerned. So, and keep in mind, when you're looking at data, you're also trying to figure out what does that data mean, and how does that data allow me to make some decisions in my organizational infrastructure or plans going forward with that. And again, we're looking at what are those preferences these different groups have that may be effective in regards to hiring, recruiting, retaining, all those things to take into consideration as you move forward with how you manage retirement in your work areas. Next slide, please, Jennifer.
Thank you, Mario. So I think this is actually me. So we've just been really lucky, and we've been able to find some wonderful data from colleagues at Coupa, and they have some really interesting work here about the demographics. So we wanted to kind of compare research administration to other fields within higher education, and here we have a comparison from 2019 of higher education staff versus the US workforce. So what's kind of key to take away from this is that Incura is even more demographically skewed than the rest of the higher education workforce as far as we can tell. So this is a little more skewed in terms of slightly older workers. As Mario had alluded to, what we're really seeing is that we should be 50% in those older generations and 50% in those younger generations, and realistically, we're just not. Incura and research administration is closer to 75 to 80% in those older generations. We're going to see and are already seeing a pipeline problem in our workforce, though we hope that this can somewhat be resolved by people kind of changing fields and moving into the workforce later, maybe after a BA or after a master's degree. And then we're going to talk about some of that pipelining and retirement. So to the next slide, and I believe we have another poll.
Yes, we do have our next poll, and it reads, what % of your workforce in your team or your office would you estimate are planning to retire in the next 5 years? And you have 5 selections here. And while you're doing that, I just want to remind you to put your questions and comments in the chat, and we'll be more than happy to respond to those. Give you a few more seconds.
As we wait for this poll to complete, one thing really to consider is looking at those different recruiting strategies, making sure you have that diversity in your work area when it comes to age, and that's an important factor as you consider, along with realizing that you will have retirement in your workforce. And it's really in this field that we're in, the training typically takes about, I would say, about 2 to 3 months before you can get a research administrator up and going. In my opinion, with my experience, it really is there's a lot of complicated technical types of skill sets that are necessary to be successful in this field. And I think that's something to consider as you're planning your succession planning.
I agree, Mario. According to our audience, 67% predict that none to 20% of their office staff is planning to retire in the next 5 years. So it looks like people think very few are actually planning to retire over the next 5 years. So let's see what our data has told us about that. We'll go to the next slide with Saika.
Perfect, fantastic. So, so I have to say, those estimates that you have for the next 5 years are probably those of you who thought it was more like 25% or even up to 25% or more are probably more accurate. So most of you maybe don't have the most accurate read on what your staff is actually going to be doing. So really what we're looking at here, this is again the Coupa data. Coupa doesn't have research administration as a separate segment. So we have kind of a mix here of office, clerical, and fiscal affairs. This was from 2019, and 37 to 32% were over the age of 55 in 2018. So I would argue that you really have an 8-year event horizon where you're looking at about a third of your work, potentially a third of your workforce looking and seeking to retire. Again, the big factors in this are the stock market, retirement plans, really the age of Social Security, and the age of Social Security pension, if that is affecting your organization, and also the age of Medicare. Should the age of Medicare or Social Security shift upward by the United States government, you would really see a shift in plans. But if we don't see a shift in that, I think you're more likely to see a much higher percentage, really a third of your workforce retiring in the next 5 to 8 years. Is kind of what this is telling us. We've done some other kind of research, and there's been some other work that seems to bear that out as well. So that might be something for people to think a little bit more about. Next slide. The other thing with age, people kind of ask me, why is age so important? And Mario kind of alluded to this. It's really pivotal. It's really critical. So SHRM, the Society for HR Management, has a really interesting quote that 50% of boomers have retired in place. They've lost faith in their employer and they aren't willing to go the extra mile, and their presence is preventing others from moving up. So there's a problem with managing through demographic change, and that problem is not just retirement. Younger cohorts are bringing different values and expectations, which creates new recruiting and retention issues. You really need to think about those millennials and Gen Zs and their desire to move or shift or continue to learn and grow, and what that looks like in combination with a real growth in retirement that's going to happen and is happening. The values here that we can support and we need to think about in retaining those younger workers are work-life balance, opportunity to progress, flexible work, a sense of purpose, and professional development. There's been really interesting work done by groups like Liberty Mutual. Insurance is a very traditional field. They needed to recruit younger workers, and they really looked at lengthy onboarding, paid internships, peer mentoring, and merit-based compensation. For Incura, it really is going to affect our membership numbers. How do we attract younger members? Do we wait for them to move up? Do we assume there will be movement into the field at a later time? I would argue, based on the numbers we've seen, retirement is happening across higher education as staffing as a whole. So my argument to you that this assumption that you would maybe poach finance staff or poach administrative staff from another area, my argument to you is that that talent base or talent pool is not going to be there, because they have other opportunities in their own existing kind of path, because other people in their path are retiring as well. We're seeing retirement en masse in staffing, in higher education. So it's not that people wouldn't move laterally, but to assume you're going to open a position and get a lateral move, you're making an assumption, because there could be an easier move upward for them in their own existing space. So it's just something to think about. It's these gap analysis. Do we need to think about research administration and retirement, the next phase of your career? Is that something we need to think about for Incura as an organization? With all this talent that's retiring and potentially leaving the field, is there a way to tap into that talent and have them continue to support research administration even in retirement? Do we help to reskill those older workers so they can continue to work, particularly with things like social media and technology? Do we allow job shadowing? Do we put an emphasis on online training programs? Do we harness remote work in a different way when we think about the age and demographics of our field and of our industry? So those are kind of just the things that come to mind. But I think we're going to move next to race. So I'm going to ask for the next slide.
Yeah, before we move to race, we do have 2 questions that I want to pose. The first one is for the age comparison, US versus Incura. Did you just look at the Incura members from the US or all Incura members?
Absolutely. We looked at all Incura members. Raspers has also done data. We can segment it out and we can pull members from by region, including region 8. Region 8 would be our international region. We haven't done that demographics where we pull that out, but we absolutely could, and we could look at, it's a very interesting thing to consider if the age of our international members in region 8 looks very different than the rest of our community and what that also means. Fantastic question.
Great. And the next question, for the age as well, the generation pie chart that we showed, what was the year range for Gen Zs versus millennials?
Absolutely. So we defined, there's some debate there, and that's also an excellent question. I believe we used the year 2000 as our break point. That's what we chose to do. But there is some debate there, right around 1998 up to 2001, depending on which resource you address and compare from.
Okay. And we talked about retirement a little bit. Another question that was posed, and I'll shift this one to Jennifer. Do you have any data on average years experience in the field? And if so, have you compared that to the age data in any meaningful way? And the two generally would go together. So how do employers bear the burdens or the cost of training for the younger and more inexperienced individuals, as opposed to seeking more experienced candidates?
That question has a lot of different parts to it, but I'll give a general answer. I think that the best case scenario, if there's any way possible to do it within your organizational structure, is to ensure that you're bringing people in at the very beginning stages of the profession, so that we're training new research administrators who have not been in the profession before, as well as doing what we can to retain our mid-level people who may be considering changing professions altogether, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Additionally, as people transition out because they're retiring, if you have someone retire and they have 20 years experience or 35 years of experience and you go to replace them, you should not expect to replace them with someone with 20 years experience or 35 years of experience, and you don't want to do that, because you want to hire in someone that will hopefully stay for a period of time. Now, those periods of time are not as long as what they once were. But if you're hiring someone in a leadership position, you want them to be there long enough so that they're able to take on the large challenge that they may be coming there to address, which could be a 5 to 7 year project. So I think that the best possible scenario, if you're able to do so, is to have a career ladder where you can be bringing in people that are completely outside the profession, able to promote people within the profession, and able to also attract people who have some experience. But you don't always necessarily need to look with someone with equivalent experience, because that's just, it's not a realistic, I don't think, it's not a realistic expectation.
Let me follow up on that comment, that Jennifer, I agree with her tremendously on the idea of having a career ladder in place, but also having a robust internal training program. As I'm noticing more, we see the data shows that and there are folks that are coming in the field for the first time will get discouraged between 1 or 2 years and leave it because they don't have that guidance to train and build skill sets that will make them successful in their work. I think that's an important factor, along with obviously the idea of having some seasoned experienced folks to mentor them in the process as well. I think those are two very key important factors as we move into this new planning that we're doing, and I think it's important. Training is important. Retention.
Yes,
and for recruiting, because we get asked from individuals that are coming to work here, what does their training program look like? What does a career letter look like? You want to encourage folks that have those questions, and you want to have to be able to respond to that by telling them that this is what it looks like here at your institution. That's a recruiting strategy, in my opinion, as well as a retention one.
Yes, thank you both. And to respond to the first part of that question, we do have data on the average age as well as years experience in the field. We're just doing some more drilling down of that data, but we do have the data to back up what we are presenting on today. So let's go ahead to our next section on race.
Yes, race, that another demographic important to as we look at how our organization is composed in comparison to the U.S. working population. As you can tell here, we are heavily white, and then in comparison to the U.S. population, and less Hispanic. There are some opportunities here for us to, with the idea of remote work, I think there's an opportunity there to try to expand your diversity. If you are in an organization that is supporting work from home strategies to keep for retention and recruiting, this will allow the universities to expand their footprint to hire from larger experience and even diverse candidate pools. I think if anything, what this chart shows is that we still have there hasn't been much change in this information over the past few years. Very little has changed, and I think there's some opportunities now to create that diversity candidate pool and expand it throughout where you wouldn't be able to do it if you're in a location that doesn't have diversity to hire from in your communities. I think it's an important thing to consider here. Next slide goes to Jennifer.
Yes. So looking at the Rasper's longitudinal data that compares how distributions of different people groups have changed over time. If you look at the white population, you feel 83%, 84%, 82%, that's not much of a change. That's just noise there. But when you look at the Hispanic population, you can see that there is a growth in the Hispanic population in research administration. So we have managed to become more inclusive in that area and better represented, something that's more comparable to the US population. But where we're having a significant problem is with African American research administration, retention, and recruitment. It's 6.4 to 4.4. You could say, well, that's just 2 points. It's the same as what we saw in the white population. But when you're going from 84 to 82, that's not much of a change. When you're going from 6.4 to 4.4, then you're dropping by a third. So this data gives us an indication that something needs to be done to address this. We see this as a problem because when we lose talent, it's very difficult to retain. Mario said it takes 2 months to onboard someone to get them up and running. That would be someone that's an experienced research administrator. If you're bringing in someone with no experience in research administration, it could take a year until they feel confident enough to work independently. Or depending on what the job is, it can take a lot longer. So because our field is very exacting, if we make a mistake, it's a big deal. And it can usually be corrected, but usually not without a lot of angst. So we want to make sure that when we're bringing people in, we are being inclusive in how we're recruiting. And then once we have people in our group, that we're doing everything we can to make them feel welcome and included and part of the group and engaged and supported and hang on to this group of people that we have seduced into coming into our profession and keep them here. So we can go to the next slide. And so, you know, looking again at similar information, and this is from just the Rasper's 2020, we asked the question, who is planning to leave? Are you planning to leave research administration for any reason in the next 2 years? So this is not just people that are planning to leave because they plan to retire. These are people who are planning to leave because they paid their house off, their kids are through college, they have just decided that they want to go and do something else with their life, or whatever reason. You know, so when you look at that, you can see again, there is a jump in certain people groups that are in go. Now, I want to comment on the Native American and Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander. Those numbers were very small, and a lot of times when you do surveys, those groups just sort of get thrown out because they're so small that you can't make a statistical conclusion with such small numbers. But I decided, since I am Native American and it was my survey and I could do what I wanted to, that I would include it. So even though it's a very small number, these numbers are not statistically solid. I have to tell you that. So when you've got, for example, 10 people, you know, it's hard to draw information from those 10 people of what 1,000 people in that group might do. But there were certainly enough people in the other people groups that we could draw conclusions. And what we're seeing is the African American and Asian research administrators are considering leaving the profession for one reason or another. What we also saw is when asked the question, are you looking for a job right now? Which is an even more direct question. So someone might be saying, oh, I'm fed up with this, I'm going to leave, you know, one of these days I'm going to leave, or I might leave within the next 2 years. That's a different frame of mind than my resume's out there, I'm looking right now, or I'm negotiating a change right now. And again, if you look at the African American and Asian populations, we've got people in those people groups that are looking right now. So what do you do with that knowledge? Perhaps just be more aware that this is something that is occurring within our profession, and ask yourself, what can I do as an individual? If I were to appoint myself as being in charge of trying to fix this, what can I do to make sure that my colleagues are feeling supported and included? What can I do to offer to mentor someone who may not look like me? Or what can I do to make sure that this person knows how to do their job with confidence, or that they're not being bullied by anyone? I'm doing my part in that. So we can go to the next slide.
There for a minute.
Sure.
We talked about, you know, how important leadership is, and how important having self-awareness as a leader in the organization to better adopt to change, right? It's hard to change your leadership style, but sometimes it's necessary, and it's important to be aware of our surroundings, and making sure that the staff feels comfortable and encourage staff to participate in some decisions at the leadership level as well. Being inclusive is very important in all of this. I think that's a big part of growing your professional development and allowing others to grow with around you. I think those are 2 points that I wanted to make as I jump over to the next poll.
Yes, and while we're getting ready for that poll to load, I do have a question from the audience. Is there anything in the data that reveals why African Americans are leaving the field?
Well, in this, and I'm I don't know if these things are directly related. I don't have a way to know that. But I will tell you that we also looked at bullying and divided it out by different people groups. And what we saw, and I've got the data here, so because I thought I'd be asked that question. When you look at bullying on a daily basis, people who perceive themselves as being bullied, and if they perceive themselves as being bullied, they are. It needs to be addressed. And African American population of the survey of over people that answered this question made up 4.6% of the survey respondents, but 18% of those who said, I'm being bullied on a daily basis. So if someone is feeling like they're being bullied on a daily basis, then why would they stay? Another is on a weekly basis, 5%, on a monthly basis, 5.45%. So in every scenario, there were more people than the amount of the population that they should have been. If there's 4.6% that are in that people group, then you would expect to see about 4.6% who were in the group that said, yes, this happens to me on a daily basis, or yes, this happens to me on a weekly basis. But in every instance, it was higher than what was anticipated. So I cannot help but think that there is an association between those two numbers. More work needs to be done to get a definitive answer on that.
Okay.
Jennifer, thank you for that. I know that you've also done work related to coverage when people are out, and I know that there is a disparity there as well. So I think if you feel that you're being bullied, potentially at a higher rate, and then in addition to that bullying at a higher rate, you don't feel that when you're out, you have a vacation or a break because your work is not covered, and there is a racial disparity there as well, that does not seem to create an environment of support that would indicate that you feel valued in the field, your contributions are equally valued, and that you wish to remain or stay.
Thank you both for that. Now, for our poll number 3, what % of your workforce in your team or office are women? And as we expected, 84% are women. So that aligns very closely with what Jennifer has for Rasper's data. It aligns very closely with what Incura has for profile data. So it's very interesting to see those responses and how it confirms what we already know. Mario, I believe that you are next.
Yeah, and let me take you back to some of the comments that have been made about there's some gender differences as far as salaries are concerned. We can only, some of the data that we find can only suggest that salaries may have remained low in this field simply because of gender bias in this area of salaries, undervaluing undervaluing the role of women in the field in this area has caught up with us. And I think if you ask most people around the field, what is the biggest challenge? And it really is salaries and issues. We've done salary surveys for Incura as well, and you can still tell that there's some salary discrepancies between the gender. One more thing to consider, it appears that the salaries do begin to shift higher when it came to leadership, and which are predominantly male, and more instances that we look at demographically. So you can tell here the split between our U.S. working population and Incura is really significantly different. It looks significantly different, and it aligns with what the poll indicates. So there's that. I think we just need to make sure that our folks, when we're looking at negotiating salary and compensation, that we really take into consideration equal pay And I think it's important that we continue to move forward this because it affects all of us, right? And it affects all research administration members together. Next slide, Ms. Saika, is it?
It's up to you, Maury, if you want to start by continuing to talk about the unpaid labor.
There was a section in there that I wanted to Saika to cover as an example of a U.S. system, but I can talk to you a little more about this. It really is about the impact of gender is really involved in the training and the value of women that we tend to look at heavily. We're heavily a women organization, and I think there's opportunities for us, like I mentioned earlier, to take a closer look at those underpayments and normalizing it due to this gender imbalance, which really is, it reflects that it really indicates that there is probably due to undervaluing work that women do. I'm gonna do more unpaid labor and office notes. You know, they do a lot of. We're involved in right now, as you can nationally, statistically, it shows women have left their fields because of the pandemic, because of having to stay home, childcare issues. You know, but there is also the other part. There's also males that also having to stay home, you know, to take care of childcare issues and taking a part in their making a part of their life to support as well. So we should have equal opportunities together here. I'll pass it on to Saika because she had a really good example of this. I thought it was really interesting. I couldn't wait for her to show this slide.
Absolutely.
Really nice picture.
So I want to talk first about the UC system, and then we'll go through the data on this slide. So the University of California has a system in place now where we're considering all jobs in families. And so it's really made me start to think research administration and the families the research administration occupies, how are they graded against other types of work? And then where do the salaries come in, and what does the gender look like of those populations? So when you consider a research administrator grade 3 versus a finance administrator grade 3, what level are they pitched at and what are they being paid? And I think that there's some real work that needs to be done there to make sure that we're not replicating bias against women and not considering or advocating for the complexity of the work being done. As a field, are we undervalued and therefore underpaid? And then when we speak to our communities who are engaging, do we need to talk about asking for a raise, the impact of staying in a role long term, applying for things that are reach or stretch positions when you don't meet all of the criteria, and the impact of a graduate degree, particularly when you're a woman. In looking at the data you see on the screen now, this is again Coupa data. What I found the most dramatic here is that the top lines are related to staying in the same job. And basically, as a woman, when you stay in a job for between 8 and 22 years, it flatlines. Your pay flatlines. With men, it dips slightly and then goes up. So what you're seeing here, and what I found the most fascinating about this work, when you look at the second chart, is that when you're looking at, this is the female pay ratio. So basically, newly hired staff are paid almost equitably, which means that when we do our initial comp, we're actually not doing poorly. It's actually 99 cents on the dollar. However, at 20 years, women are making only 86 cents on the dollar compared to men, which means that in terms of annual salary, when you're looking at 10 years in a job, it's $4,000 a year less. And when it's 20 years in a job, it's $8,000 less. Over 20 years, the cumulative pay difference is $87,000. And that doesn't even include benefits matching like retirement and potential to invest and grow over time. So what this is telling us is that in that middle part of the career, women are less effective in engendering a pay raise when staying in the same job. They are less likely to apply for more jobs that they believe to be outside of their core ability. They don't stretch as much, but in addition to that, over the trajectory of their career, not the initial point where we start, but as they continue through their career as a staff member in higher education. To be clear, the Coupa data is staff in higher education. So this includes research administrators. We see a decline over the years. The longer women stay in administration, the less they make on the dollar compared to men. They start at 99 and they end in the mid 80s. So as they continue to work in terms of time and in terms of height and level with their career, they are consistently paid less than men with the same skills, qualification, and years of experience. And as somebody who had this happen to them and who actually advocated for herself and was wholly unsuccessful, I want to tell you it happens, and I was unsuccessful, and I sat there with a PhD and I got paid less than a man with a master's degree, and he had the same number of years of experience as me and was less qualified, and I was told to take it or leave it. So I have to be honest, this is still happening, and I was told this by a woman. So this is still happening, and this still happens today. So this is something we really need to talk about, as well as boosting up those in our field to ask for, to seek promotion. And also when they're staying in the same position, that's the other key piece here. You don't always have to seek promotion, but if you are staying in the same position, you need to advocate for yourself for reevaluation of your salary with an equity review, and considering equity and also reclassification, because what we're seeing is that it appears men are doing that and women are not. Next slide, unless there's questions. All right.
Let's go ahead with this slide and then we'll follow up with some questions.
Okay, perfect. So where do we stand? Where do we stand as a whole? Okay, so just some bullet points here. Where are we? What are we as a field? We are white, we are female, and we're over the age of 40. That is where we are as a field, despite that's not necessarily what your panel looks like today. That is what research administration, for the most part, looks like. And then why does this matter? Why does it matter that we don't match? Why it matters is because we will do better. Diversity encourages creativity. It encourages and improves collaboration. It cultivates a comfortable work environment. It attracts top talent. It increases profitability. It looks good because it is good. Millennial and Gen Z populations are avoiding companies without a diverse workforce. So not only do we have an age demographic problem, we have a retention problem, and we have an upcoming retirement precipice that we are about to go over the edge of. If we do not engender the diversity, we will not have younger workers seek to work with us as an employer, or as employers in higher education, which is challenging because we meet some of the other things that younger workers are looking for: flexible schedules and mission alignment. So we need to make sure that we're embodying diversity and equity and inclusion as well. What they're looking for is millennials and Gen Z need to see a diversity officer. They need to see, they're looking at Glassdoor, LinkedIn, and Indeed. They're looking beyond hiring. It's not just hiring. We really need to emphasize promotion and retention. They expect to see mission statements, but you always have to go beyond that, and you really need to focus on the whole about things like inclusion. So that's kind of the takeaway there. I think next slide. Kind of the next thing, like, what does this mean for research administration? Well, we have some gaps in age, race, and gender, and we need to have a plan and a strategy. So just to be very clear, diversity doesn't work without inclusion. Numerous studies have shown that diversity does not drive inclusion. In fact, without inclusion, there is usually a diversity backlash. Sponsorship and for multicultural professions, 40 shows that even though 41% of senior level African Americans and 20% of senior level Asians, 18% of senior level Hispanics feel obliged to sponsor employees of the same gender or ethnicity, for Caucasians, that's only 7%. So there's a lot of pressure on people of color in more senior positions to mentor and train. There aren't enough of them, and that is not going to work. So we need to expect to see cross-gender and cross-age, cross-gender, and cross-racial mentorship in order for this to be successful. Another kind of issue that's very difficult with data is that it's easy to measure diversity, which is why we do it. I can sit here and tell you that we have a large number of white women, that African Americans are leaving, that we have a retirement problem coming up. That's a matter of headcount. It's difficult to do it correctly, but it's not difficult. But quantifying the feelings of inclusion is very, very challenging. We have some data we're starting to work through right now, but it's not the easiest thing to do. And you have to understand that narrative along with the numbers to draw a picture and bring this together for communities. The Center for Talent Innovation has managed to do this, and they've done some really unique and interesting, robust work. but what they really found is that there are 4 drivers of inclusion. It's inclusive leadership, so people can feel free to express themselves and their views. The diversity and inclusion group has really talked about this with bringing your whole self to work. It's about authenticity. People bringing their whole self and authentic self into the workplace as well. It's networking and visibility, particularly for women and people of color. This is key to rising and playing in the field, especially when there's uneven promotion and sponsorship. And then in addition to that, it's a clear career path, particularly for women, LGBT, and people of color. They need to see a clearer map to success in the field for them. 45% of women off-ramp at some point because of childcare or elder care. 29% of women feel pushed off the ladder. 23% feel like they've stalled their career. LGBT and people of color struggle to name simple solutions to opening that blocked career path. Ironically, it's usually the majority group that presumes that to identify the reasons, and we aren't actually engaging with those communities, those underrepresented communities, to ask them why, what they need to help them progress. But sponsorship is really the key here. And I want to emphasize again that sponsorship has to look across gender, race, class, and sexual orientation. There are not enough minority leaders in this field for there to be enough minority mentorship. It simply statistically won't happen. So for those, it's predominantly white women who are leaders in our field, though there are quite a few white men as well. And I think that there will need to be better sponsorship and mentorship across that in order to kind of move forward in this way. All right, that was that from me.
Thank you, Saika. And while we're moving forward to prepare for our next poll, I do want to pose a question real quickly on one of the slides that talked about succession planning. So why is this data important to the fact that we need to move forward with leadership and succession planning for research administration?
Absolutely, I can certainly start and then kick over to my 2 fellow speakers. So why is this so important? Well, many talent is going to walk out the door. People are going to choose to retire. And whilst years of experience are not the only criteria, years of experience are incredibly important. And we know that older generations have been reticent and less likely to codify and write everything down. And so what you want is, reason we need to consider this is a couple of things. Number one, you want to have an honest conversation about when somebody's going to retire, and you don't want to have it 14 to 30 days before they retire. You want to have it longer in advance of that. That's the first point here. Second of all, you want to be able to be in a position where you can think about when somebody is going to retire, to have the time and the space to not just think about replacing them. As Jennifer had mentioned before, you don't necessarily want someone with 20 or 30 years of experience, but if someone's been in a position or with your team for an extended period, it can also be an opportunity to rethink how the work is structured overall. Just because Susie did A, B, and C and Johnny did D, E, and F does not mean that you should keep 2 jobs and replace Susie and Johnny. It may be an opportunity to rethink how things are structured. And that's something to really think about as well. So these are kind of a couple of the reasons why this is so important. But in someone's final period of employment, it's just really important to think about what you need to offboard from them, how to mentor and train in, and making sure that things, people can be shifted and replaced. Thank you so much.
That was a great response. Let's look at our poll results. How much of your work can be completed from a remote location? And as we expected, 96% of respondents say that their work can be completed remotely. So it's going to be very interesting to see how that also aligns with our data. So Jennifer, would you like to go ahead and explain some more about this?
I would. When we did the Rasper survey in 2020, this was right after the pandemic started, and so had just moved off campus. And so at that point in time, some people were saying, hurrah, I'm so glad I don't have to make that commute. And some people were saying, oh my gosh, how on earth am I going to be able to work with my 2 boys in there tearing the furniture apart? So mentoring for school. So people were having all kinds of reactions to the unusual situation we found ourselves in. So the question that was asked is how much work can be completed from a remote location? Because when we look at people coming back, or do people need to come back, or could they continue to work remotely? That's the key question. If you can't do your work remotely, then perhaps you have a student-facing or faculty-facing position where you have to actually be there to do that. But what we're seeing from this is that it looks like in the 2020 data, 37% said that they could do most of their work, and 60% said that they could do all of their work. Well, 3% has changed from what we just saw from the questionnaire that we just put out. In the poll, it said it was 33% said most, and 63% said all. So some of the mosts appear to have turned into alls. No one said do any of it from home. So with that, we have 96 or 97% saying I can do my work from home. And that is something that Mario raised a good point, that if we want to engender a more diverse team, and diverse in every way, whether you're looking at years of experience or racial diversity or gender diversity or whatever, being able to hire remote workers can certainly help with building a team that is more representative of what we would like our team to look like. So if we go to the next slide, one of the questions that was also asked was, considering that, I mean, none of our work went away. As a matter of fact, we had all the work we normally had plus COVID proposals or COVID or CARES Act post-award things, or depending on where you are in the continuum. But people said that their work was about the same, but their overall feeling of stress and the conflict between home and work, about 50% said that was better, about 30% said it was about the same, and about 20% said that it was worse. So with 50% saying, even though I'm juggling all these different things at the same time, this is better. It's really better working from home. Now, this was back when we were first into it. So I would say that does show that remote work, which is something some of our colleagues, for example, NIH and others have successfully been doing for decades. So as we're going back into the office, and different people have different things they have to deal with from their governors on down, but this is certainly something that I think data can help. So this is an example of the kind of poll you might want to do with your own staff. How much of your work can be done at home? Or if given the choice, would you continue to work from home on a permanent basis? So that's another question that was asked. And if you could answer that now, I'm taking Lanika's time.
Thanks for finding out. Let me, while we ask, can I add something more to that conversation? So
yes.
We look at the idea of how leadership looks at it is, are we being effective? Are we performing the duties that we were assigned to when we took this job? So here again, it goes back to metrics. Having a good metric system in place that could answer and respond to those questions to your leadership team is important. Some of us have certain systems that we've adopted internally to capture that kind of data. We use, I'm not promoting smart sheets, but that's actually something that we actually have implemented here to manage our workloads and effectively look at the individual productivity of our staff members. So there are ways to come around and be able to measure your performance in your organizations. And they have that handy and transparent to the rest of the team as well. So they're looking at each other's work and the productivity that's happening too. It really creates engagement for your team as well as you're working remotely, because I think that's one of the challenges as well, is to keep our staff engaged and on a daily basis. There's a social distancing things or challenges that we all have faced, and we're working through those. But I think those are important factors. But I can't emphasize enough having a metrics system in place to measure your success.
I agree with
Mario.
heartily.
Yep.
Okay, so we've got 50%, 89% are saying that they either would or probably would, if given the choice, continue to work from home. Am I adding that up correctly? 88%?
88.
88, yep. A majority.
Yeah, definitely a majority. So that is a huge change from where we were before. So we had back in 2020, we had 31% say they probably would. So that has 33% said that then, and 31% now are saying that they probably would, but definitely would has jumped up to 57%. So the overall probably would or definitely would has gone from 71.3% to 88%. So that's only leaving 12% that are in the probably would not or definitely would not continue to work from home if given the choice. So again, this is just an example of the kind of information that you can use. If you see this on a national scale, then this might be something that you want to ask on a local scale, so that you can think about how you can best support your own team. Okay.
Yeah, this is mine. So,
Again.
we look at these opportunities of remote work and diversity. I mean, they really go hand in hand. And I can't emphasize enough how the opportunities, and I'm going to work my way all the way from the bottom up. The opportunities we have with older workers that have really, some are maybe even want to go take time just to avoid commutes. They have more flexibility to do that. Other aspects of their office work, they can really do it from home as well. The caregiving piece of it, I mean, a lot of us throughout this year and a half have struggled. These are statistically more likely to happen in females, unfortunately. Other things that happen, you can face a high cost of providing supervision for individuals while at the workplace. It's not an optimal situation, but it's a flexible situation. I'm hearing more and more in the social media that 40% of women, 40% of the workforce is more likely to continue in their job if flexibility is being provided to them. So there's a lot of polls going out there about that level of flexibility necessary. Otherwise, they'll just go somewhere else, maybe even change fields and careers altogether. Some of the benefits of remote working with and having those flexibilities are really decision makers for a lot of individuals that are working in this field of English administration. One more thing that this came out, and that was interesting. This is through the McKinsey reports, that we talk about disabilities, individuals with disabilities. The idea of hiring folks with disabilities where they aren't given the access or maybe that opportunity, that is an important area of recruitment that we can tap into as well. Just getting around is so important in the workplace that it really allows us to have those opportunities. Again, these are opportunities to create a more inclusive society within your groups. Military families, folks having to their spouses are in the military, they have to move around. It makes it really difficult for them to really maintain or sustain a a permanent situation for them, or maybe even unable to invest in a particular retirement system either. Those are the opportunities you get to recruit folks that are actually giving back to their country as well. That's and that make it so difficult for them to have a spouse working remotely. There's just so many things that work-life impact. Just a win-win situation for the organization to develop that strategy to hire with a larger footprint throughout the country. Just things that we're looking at and how that impacts their diversity or opportunities for diversity inclusion in the workplace. One of the other things, I think that's culture. So.
Yeah, this is me. We're just going to do a wrap up here. I'm so grateful that we've been able to do this kind of like mini case study for you guys around how you can use data to kind of drive decision making, and then kind of at the highest level, how do you survey, why do you survey, and what does it mean? And so what we're really thinking about here is how do we serve our membership? How do we serve the research administration community with programming and advocacy? How do we expand and support membership? And how do we support research administrators to be what they can be? And we need to talk about culture, practice, and inclusion. And so it's really about creating diverse and inclusive policies. So the survey work around things like, when are you going to retire? What are you thinking for your career? And then also the work from home. If 88% of our community believes they can work from home and wants to, do we need to advocate for that on the whole? We need to choose realistic goals. We need to think about our labor market and strive for proportional representation of these underrepresented groups. We need to harness that work from home ability to think about how we expand and diversify and really focus on those underrepresented underrepresented demographic groups. We need to change our recruitment and hiring processes to think about diverse talent. You need to consider subconscious bias or unconscious bias, and we need to address it head on. Just a teaser, there is a workshop on how to do that for recruitment, retention, for all of these things, and that will be occurring for the first time for a national meeting. It's a pre-workshop. Myself and Maria Medina will both be there with other colleagues. Please think about attending. We need to shift our culture in research and administration, as well as in each of our institutions, to have policies to promote diversity, but beyond that, to adjust our actual culture. We need to do this because this is the most complicated piece of the puzzle. How do we create a climate of acceptance so we can, where we prioritize the individual? How do we host inclusion awareness and get people on board? And then we need to be smart and we need to be patient. Big change takes time. Problems and unexpected challenges will arise, but we need to harness them to achieve our goals, which is to have an inclusive practice and allow and support all to be involved. Our final slide is actually here, a resource slide that provides a whole list of resources that may be helpful to everyone watching here today to better understand surveys, the use of data, labor and statistics, and then some of the other things around allyship, and amazing work done by Sherm as well.
Yes. Thank you all so much. So as we go into our Q&A, we have a few minutes. We're going to do something a little different, rapid fire Q&A. So I'm going to blurt out the questions in our chat, and then I want one of our panelists to quickly respond to that question, okay? Our first one, has the recent shifts to remote work, retirements, and those leaving the field shown anything revealing about the future of research administration? Jennifer, would you like that one?
Sure. I think that we're going to see opportunities for some of our middle level managers. And if you are considering an upward mobility in research administration, and there is nothing wrong with getting at a level and saying it's okay for me to stay where I am. But if you're looking at going from a small institution to a large institution, or going from a large institution to a small institution and a larger job, those opportunities are going to be coming open. So if I were you, I would advise that you do everything you can to prepare yourself in your CV and your resume and your education and your experience and all those things to make yourself as attractive as possible for those opportunities that are going to come open, because there is going to be a void and we're going to be looking for people to fill that void.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yep. Next, considering the in-depth level of the data that's been presented on today, are there any plans to do more qualitative research to understand the experiences of research administrators, particularly those who are from underrepresented groups?
I can take that.
Raspers or
I think several of us have been working on projects that we are hoping to have more data from, that we could be able to promote that data in workshops and so forth. I think there's a lot to come with that from that question, and there could be. We'd like to see what happens after post-pandemic. We really like to see how folks react to post-pandemic work-life balance, because it's the other side too. You know, when do you turn off your computer? You know, when do we stop working? I know several of us are doing much more online time than ever before. So I think there's got to have that work-life balance. I think there's some opportunities there to take a closer look at that kind of data post-pandemic. So looking forward to being a part of any research that anybody has interest in pursuing. Please let us know.
thank you. Saika, earlier you mentioned about being an advocate for yourself and when you're thinking about salary negotiations and such. Have any of you encountered or heard backlash when asking for a salary evaluation for equity?
I have. I have to say, I think when it comes to the money, I think that is really where you see the backlash. I think that valuing minorities and people of color in particular in this space is really, really tricky. I'm an advocate for doing your comp reviews with a redacted resume with no name on it. I think that isn't something that we need to advocate for as a field. In addition to that, and people have seen, I've written about this. I know Jennifer's also done work. When you advocate for higher degrees, you have to have a master's, you have to have a doctorate, you change the demographics of those who are eligible. So when you say you have to have a master's, you say you have to have a PhD, you are really going to have a whiter and more Asian talent pool and a less Hispanic and less African American. At a master's degree, African American is closer to the population, but at a doctoral level, it's not. And so you shift, and that's a piece of it. When it comes to advocating for salary, I think that women are gender trained from a young age, not to be greedy and not to be selfish. And by doing that, we train them from a very young age not to talk about money in a lot of cases as well, and not to overvalue themselves and to not be grabby. And so that doesn't help them in the salary negotiation process. I certainly personally have experienced this, and I have consistently seen women, and particularly women of color, get serious pushback to the point where their materials are not even sent in. I personally have experienced that, and I actually changed jobs twice because they wouldn't even submit my materials, and then they were literally, a PI cried when I left. And I thought, like, you've been underpaying me for 2 years. Like, what did you think was going to happen? I'm not going to stay here forever and continue to be underpaid. So it's a really tricky one. It really is. But I defer to my colleagues as to their experiences.
Really, you know, I've experienced the same thing, Saika, and I say you have to continue to advocate for yourself and you have to be consistent with it. Don't back down, but also don't let anyone take advantage of you.
Yeah, the other piece that you see here for women is that people complain sometimes that women of color in particular move on, but as a woman, it's much more difficult to get retention, but it's also much more difficult to get a higher pay raise in your same job. So what you see is women move, and the reason they move is to get a pay raise. They get anchored where they are, and men are hired for potential, or men are reviewed for potential, and women are reviewed for deficiencies. This is something we're also going to discuss in this workshop that's occurring before the Ankara National Conference. Women are reviewed focusing on their deficiencies, and men are seen for potential. And so women are not then reevaluated for salary, for potential, or for what they've grown into as well, which is another factor here. So we need to reframe.
Just to plug that workshop again, this unconscious bias training piece that we will intend to simulate. I think it's important to understand that we have to learn this. We have to learn this as a leader. You have to learn this as a supervisor. You have to learn what that means, what it is. It's not that you're not doing the right thing; it's that you don't know what the right thing is. And we all struggle with that collectively. There is no one way, right way, but there are some wrong ways that we are familiar with. So just keep that in mind as far as training yourself in those areas that you may need to be familiar yourself with if you're going to be managing or you're as a coworker. Just
Thank you both. As we wind down, we have come to an end. Thank you all for participating and for submitting your questions. Maybe we can get these questions, the rest of them, sent to us later and respond to you more publicly. But as we close, I would like to say thank you to our wonderful panelists on today, to the fabulous Incura staff that helped to coordinate today's webinar, and to all of the participants who stayed on with us today and participated and was very engaged in this session.